All right, let's jump right into this explainer. Welcome, everyone. Today, we're looking at something pretty fascinating. In the world of global cinema, how the movies we watch literally construct the world we see. Have you ever thought about how a single location can be interpreted in wildly different ways, just depending on who's holding the camera? Well, that is exactly what we're going to unpack today.
Think about it for a second. Can one single neighborhood actually possess two completely contradictory identities on screen? Today, we're zooming in on the Pakistani district of Lyari. It's this bustling area right in Karachi, and we're looking at how two recent major film releases paint drastically different pictures of its streets. I mean, one paints it as this dark underworld of crime, while the other showcases it as a beacon of sports empowerment and community resilience. It's honestly a perfect case study of how storytelling shapes our global perspective.
Part 1. Spotlight on Karachi's Lyari.
So first things first, we really got to understand in the backdrop here, right? We have Lyari, a historically overlooked neighborhood in Pakistan's massive city of Karachi. For years, it simply wasn't the setting for major mainstream films. It just kind of existed on the periphery of cinematic narratives. But recently, that completely flipped. Lyari went from being totally ignored by the camera to bursting into the mainstream spotlight, effectively becoming the center of a very intense cross-border cultural conversation.
Moving on to Part 2. Dhurandhar the spy thriller.
Let's look at the first film in this tale. Indian director Aditya Dhar dropped his film Dhurandhar just a few months ago, hitting theaters on December 5th, 2025. And man, following its release, it found absolutely massive box office success over in India. Audiences there just loved the high-stakes action. But right across the border in Pakistan, the reaction was incredibly mixed. It faced some serious pushback over its gritty, highly specific portrayal of Lyari. You know, what's really interesting here is how the film actually used the neighborhood. Dhurandhar is an intense spy thriller, so it frames Lyari strictly as this super dangerous backdrop for espionage. The camera zeroes right in on gang conflict, smuggling networks, and organized crime. Basically, for the sake of this fictional spy narrative, Lyari is portrayed as totally chaotic and lawless. It's a high-octane lens, for sure, but it's one that left a lot of locals feeling like their home was just being reduced to a generic action movie trope. And that brings us to a massive cinematic contrast. While the render focuses on espionage and crime, a completely different narrative is emerging out of Pakistan itself, an upcoming film called Mera Lyari, which translates to My Lyari. This one pivots entirely toward hope, sports, empowerment, and community resilience. So we are transitioning from a lens of international organized crime to a deeply local story of human empowerment. Part 3. Mera Lyari, a sports drama. Let's dive into the specifics of this totally new perspective. Pakistani writer and director Abu Aliha brings us Mera Lyari. The film stars actress Aisha Omar as a former football player whose own career was tragically cut short by a serious injury caused by domestic violence. But after leaving Lyari, she returns to her roots. And her mission? To coach a young women's football team and help them navigate and overcome their own social challenges. It's very much a story of transformation, moving away from the area's past associations with violence and focusing on a bright, determined future. To kind of give you a feel for the vibe here, the source material explicitly aligns Mera Lyari with some of the most beloved sports dramas of the last few decades. We're talking about films like Dangal, where gender norms are wrestled to the ground, Bend It Like Beckham, which brilliantly navigates cultural expectations, Chuck the India, an absolute classic about rebuilding a struggling women's team, even Hollywood's $1 Million Baby. What do all these films have in common? They're all about underdogs fighting immense societal odds to achieve triumph in the sporting arena. And that is exactly the cinematic DNA of Mera Lyari. Part 4. Political and cultural reactions. Now, you might be wondering, what happens when art contradicts life like this? Unsurprisingly, having two such opposing portrayals of the exact same place released back-to-back ignited a literal political firestorm. Sindh Information Minister Sharjeel Memon reacted very strongly to Dhurandhar, actually calling it, and I quote, another example of negative propaganda by the Indian film industry against the Pakistani film industry. That quote really highlights the geopolitical friction at play here. It shows us exactly how regional officials viewed the Indian spy thriller, basically as a fictional narrative that carried a very real-world diplomatic and cultural sting. So, as a direct response to this backlash, the Sindh Information Department decided to throw its official support behind Mera Lyari. They're actively backing this sports drama to counter the chaotic depiction we saw in Dhurandhar. Their explicit goal, as stated by the officials, is to showcase the community's evolution and highlight its peace, prosperity, and pride.
It's honestly fascinating to see a local government actively utilizing cinema to present their own counter-narrative and reclaim the image of their neighborhood.
Part 5, the global premiere.
So how exactly is this homegrown, officially backed story rolling out to the world? Well, Mera Lyari was officially announced in December 2025, but lead actress Aisha Omar shared some pretty exciting news. The film will make its international debut first on May 2nd, 2026, over at the 28th UK Asian Film Festival at the British Film Institute in London. Only after this global showcase will it actually return for a domestic release in Pakistan. It's like they want the rest of the world to see this authentic version of Lyari first. But to really get the true DNA of Mera Lyari, you have to look at this one staggering number right here, 80%. Why is that percentage so crucial to the filmmakers?
Well, director Abu Aliha points out that a whopping 80% of the cast, and we're talking supporting actors, members of the local football teams, even the male lead, Shoaib Hassan, are actual inhabitants of Lyari. They didn't just build a set on some studio lot, they shot much of the film right there in the neighborhood, casting the people who walk those streets every single day. They are actively grounding this sports drama in raw, unapologetic reality, and literally giving the actual residents the agency to tell their own story on the big screen.
Which brings us right back to the core of this entire explainer. How does cinema shape the global perception of local communities? Ultimately, whether it's through a high-stakes, fictionalized spy thriller that paints a town as a den of crime, or an inspiring, locally cast sports journey that highlights a community's resilience, we really have to ask ourselves how the media we consume dictates how we view places halfway across the world. The next time you watch a movie set in a faraway city, ask yourself, whose lens am I looking through? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep asking those big questions, and I'll catch you next time.